I pressed my palms against the balcony railing, letting the evening air cool my skin. 29 floors below, the city hummed with life I couldn't quite reach. Oliver's voice drifted from his study. Another conference call, another late night. "I'll be a little late," he'd said without looking up from his laptop. "You can stay on the balcony. I'll bring champagne later." The promise hung between us like so many others. I'd learned not to count on Oliver's later. His champagne lived in the refrigerator, waiting for celebrations that never came. Wind caught my hair, pulling it loose from its careful arrangement. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the evening city, exhaust and ambition, dinner parties and distant music. This balcony had become my refuge, the only place where I felt I could think clearly. Our marriage existed in careful routines. Oliver worked, I waited. He promised, I hoped. The pattern had worn grooves into our days, smooth and predictable as water over stone. I gripped the railing tighter. The metal was warm from the day's heat, solid beneath my fingers. Below, traffic lights changed colors in endless cycles. Red, yellow, green. Stop, wait, go. I wondered what it would feel like to choose green. The city sprawled before me, full of strangers living lives I'd never know. In those lit windows, people were making choices, taking risks, crossing lines they'd drawn for themselves. I envied them their courage. Oliver's voice grew louder through the glass door. Another deal. Another deadline. I turned away from the sound and faced the horizon. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, breaking hearts, starting over. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my pulse quicken. The evening air carried possibilities I couldn't name. I stayed at the railing, waiting for something to change. The elevator chimed behind me. I didn't turn. Oliver always took the stairs when he needed to think. But these footsteps were different, slower, more deliberate. "Fiona!" I spun around. A tall man stood in the doorway, his dark coat catching the city lights. I recognized him from Oliver's business dinners, Rowan something. They'd worked together years ago, before Oliver's promotion changed everything. "Oliver's in his study," I said, gesturing toward the glass door. Rowan stepped onto the balcony, his hands in his coat pockets. "Actually, I came to see you." The wind shifted, carrying his cologne, cedar and something darker I couldn't identify. He moved closer, not quite invading my space, but close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from his body. "I think you deserve a little freedom," he said softly. His words hit me like a physical touch. I gripped the railing harder, my knuckles white against the metal. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" His voice was low, meant only for me. "Standing out here night after night, watching the world go by. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" I glanced back at the study. Oliver's silhouette moved behind the frosted glass, phone pressed to his ear. He'd be hours yet, he always was. I started. "Shouldn't what? Feel alive?" Rowan stepped closer. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, making them seem deeper than they were. His hand moved to his coat, pulling out something small and silver. A watch, its face catching the light. "Time moves differently up here," he said, checking the hour. Away from deadlines and obligations, away from all the shoulds and shouldn'ts. I looked at the watch, then at his face. There was no pressure in his expression, only invitation. The choice was mine to make. The wind picked up, whipping my hair across my face. Rowan reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek as he tucked the strands behind my ear. The touch was gentle, questioning. I didn't pull away. His hand found my waist, fingers spread against the silk of my blouse. The touch was warm, certain, everything Oliver's distracted caresses weren't. I leaned into it, my body deciding before my mind could object. "The city's beautiful from here," Rowan murmured, but his gaze never left my face. I turned toward the view, his arms still around me. The lights below blurred into streams of gold and white, like tears of joy I'd forgotten how to cry. His other hand joined the first, pulling me back against his chest. "I used to take pictures of this view," I whispered, before Oliver got too busy to look. "Show me." I pulled out my phone, hands trembling slightly. The camera app opened with a soft click. Through the screen, I saw us reflected in the glass door. His dark coat wrapped around my pale dress, two figures stealing a moment from the night. I took the photo without thinking, capturing our reflection against the city's glow. The image was blurred, intimate, unmistakably us. I stared at it, my breath catching. "Delete it," I said, but made no move to do so. "Why?" I turned in his arms, facing him fully. His eyes were patient, kind, nothing like the hungry predator I'd expected. This was a man offering comfort, not taking it. "Because this isn't who I am." "Isn't it?" His question hung between us like the evening air, warm, heavy with possibility. Behind the glass door, Oliver's voice continued its steady drone of business and deadlines. Out here, time moved differently, just as Rowan had said. I kissed him. The photo slipped from my fingers as I reached for him, my phone clattering against the balcony floor. His mouth was warm, tasting of wine and secrets. The city lights blurred around us as I lost myself in the simple pleasure of being wanted. When we broke apart, I was breathless. The night wind cooled my flushed cheeks, but inside I burned with a heat I'd thought was gone forever. "I don't regret this," I said, and meant it. He smiled, brushing his thumb across my lower lip. "Good." The glass door slid open with a soft whisper. Oliver stepped onto the balcony carrying 2 champagne flutes, their crystal surfaces catching the city lights like trapped stars. I stood perfectly still, Rowan's warmth still lingering on my skin. My phone lay face down on the concrete, the photo hidden but not forgotten. "Sorry that took so long," Oliver said, extending a glass toward me. His eyes moved to Rowan, and something shifted in his expression. "Rowan, I didn't know you were here." "Just stopped by," Rowan replied easily, his hands back in his coat pockets. "Thought I'd say hello to your beautiful wife?" Oliver's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at me, really looked, taking in my wind-tousled hair, my flushed cheeks, the way I couldn't quite meet his gaze. "You're beautiful," he said, and I heard something new in his voice. Not accusation, but recognition. I took the champagne, my fingers brushing his. The glass was cold, a sharp contrast to the heat still racing through my veins. I lifted it to my lips, tasting bubbles that reminded me of laughter I'd forgotten how to make. "What are we celebrating?" I asked. Oliver's gaze moved between Rowan and me, lingering on the space where we'd stood together. "Good question." Rowan stepped forward, his movement casual but deliberate. "Perhaps we're celebrating honesty." The word hung in the air like a challenge. I sipped my champagne, feeling the alcohol burn away the last of my pretenses. Oliver watched me over the rim of his glass, his expression unreadable. "Honesty," Oliver repeated slowly. "That's interesting." I bent to retrieve my phone, my dress pulling tight across my back. When I straightened, both men were watching me. The photo was still there, waiting in my camera roll like evidence of my choice. "I should go," Rowan said, but he made no move to leave. Oliver set down his champagne and walked to the railing. He gripped the metal where I'd stood moments before, his knuckles white with tension. "Stay," he said quietly. "I think we need to talk." I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom curtains, my head pounding from champagne and revelations. The conversation had lasted until dawn, voices rising and falling like the city traffic below. Oliver's side of the bed was empty, his pillow still bearing the shape of his head. I pressed my face into the cool cotton, breathing in his familiar scent, soap and exhaustion, the smell of a man who worked too hard and loved too little. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for last night. R." I deleted it without responding, but the words had already burned themselves into my memory. Thank you. As if I'd given him a gift instead of betraying everything I'd promised to honor. The hotel key card Rowan had left on the coffee table caught the morning light. He'd placed it there during our three-way confession, a tangible reminder of roads not taken. Oliver had stared at it for a long time before speaking. "I know I've been absent," he'd said finally, "but I didn't know you were lonely." Lonely. Such a simple word for the ache that had been growing inside me for months. I'd tried to fill it with shopping, with books, with long hours on the balcony watching other people's lives unfold. But loneliness was a hunger that fed on itself, growing stronger with every attempt to satisfy it. I picked up the key card, turning it over in my hands. Room 1247. 12 floors below us, Rowan was probably packing, preparing to return to whatever life he'd built away from here. The card was warm from the sunlight, smooth and anonymous as the choice it represented. Oliver appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in the chair. He looked older somehow, as if the night had aged him years. "I called in sick," he said. "Thought we could talk some more." I set the key card on the nightstand, next to my wedding ring. The two objects seemed to mock each other, commitment and temptation, side by side in the morning light. "What's left to say?" He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch me. "Everything." The elevator doors opened at exactly 10:15. I knew because I'd been watching the numbers tick by on Rowan's silver watch, the one he'd left on our coffee table next to his key card. He stepped out carrying a single leather bag, his dark coat replaced by a simple gray sweater. In daylight, he looked smaller somehow, more human, and less like the mysterious figure who'd appeared on our balcony. "I came to say goodbye," he said, his eyes finding mine across the living room. Oliver stood by the window, his back to us both. He'd been there for an hour, staring down at the city as if searching for answers in the traffic patterns. "Your watch," I said, holding out the silver timepiece. Rowan's fingers brushed mine as he took it, a touch that meant both everything and nothing. "Keep it," he said quietly. "A reminder that time belongs to you." I shook my head. "I can't." "Then give it to someone who needs to remember." He glanced toward Oliver, then back to me. "Someone who's forgotten how precious each moment is." Oliver turned from the window, his face composed but tired. "Rowan." "Oliver." "I won't see you again," Rowan said, and it wasn't a question. "No," Oliver replied. "You won't." I walked to the balcony door, needing air, The morning light was harsh, stripping away the romance of last night's shadows. Below, the city moved with purpose, people rushing toward destinations I couldn't see. When I turned back, Rowan was gone. Only the faint scent of cedar lingered, and Oliver standing alone with his hands in his pockets. "He's right, you know," Oliver said. "About time. About me forgetting." I held out the watch, its silver surface reflecting the sunlight streaming through our windows. "Then remember." Oliver took it, his fingers closing around the metal. For a moment, we stood together in silence, mourning what we'd lost, and wondering what we might still save. Oliver set the watch on the mantel, next to a framed photograph from our honeymoon. In the picture, we were laughing at something I couldn't remember, our faces bright with the kind of joy that seemed impossible now. "When did we stop talking?" he asked. I sank into the armchair where he'd spent the night, still warm from his body heat. "I think we stopped listening first." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "I thought if I worked hard enough, made enough money, you'd be happy. I thought that's what love looked like. And I thought if I waited long enough, you'd notice I was disappearing." The words hung between us, honest and brutal as morning light. I pulled my knees to my chest, making myself small in the chair that had become his refuge from our broken conversations. "I saw the photo," Oliver said quietly. "On your phone." My stomach clenched. "Oliver, you looked happy. Alive in a way I haven't seen in months." He turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. "It should have been me making you feel that way." I reached for the photograph on the mantel, studying our younger selves. We'd been so certain then, so sure that love was enough to carry us through anything. When had certainty become complacency? "I deleted it," I said. "The photo?" "All of them. Every picture of us looking miserable at dinner parties. Every forced smile at company events. I deleted our whole gallery except this one." I held up the honeymoon photo, our faces glowing with happiness we'd somehow lost along the way. Oliver sat on the arm of my chair, close enough to touch but careful not to. "What do we do now?" I looked at the photograph, then at him. "I don't know. But I know what we can't do anymore." "What's that?" "Pretend." I set the picture down, meeting his eyes directly. "Pretend we're happy. Pretend last night didn't happen. Pretend we don't have choices to make." He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine for the first time in weeks. "I choose you, Fiona. I choose us. But I need to know, do you?" The question settled over me like evening air, heavy with possibility and consequence. Outside, the city hummed with life, full of people making choices that would change everything. I thought of Rowan's words about freedom, about Oliver's about time, about the woman I'd been and the one I was becoming. "Yes," I said finally. "But not the us we were, the US we could be." 3 weeks later, Oliver came home with champagne. Real champagne this time, not a promise, but an offering. He set the bottle on the kitchen counter next to 2 glasses, the same crystal flutes we'd used that night. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "I quit the Henderson account." I stared at him. The Henderson account had consumed his life for 2 years, the source of countless late nights and canceled dinners. "Oliver, that's half your income." "It's also half my soul." He worked the cork free with steady hands. I realized something. You can't love someone part-time and expect them to feel whole. The champagne foamed golden in our glasses, catching the late afternoon light streaming through our windows. We'd moved the dining table closer to the balcony door, creating space for conversations that mattered. "Dr. Martinez says we're making progress," I said, accepting my glass. "Couples therapy. Who would have thought?" Oliver smiled, the first genuine one I'd seen in months. "Although I still can't believe you told her about Rowan. Honesty, remember?" I touched his glass with mine, the crystal ringing like a small bell. "Besides, she says affairs aren't always about the other person. Sometimes they're about remembering who you used to be." We walked onto the balcony together. The city spread below us like a promise of possibility. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. I leaned against the railing where it all began, Oliver beside me. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd stayed?" Oliver asked. I considered the question, watching traffic lights change their eternal pattern of red, yellow, green. Sometimes, but wondering isn't the same as wanting. "And what do you want?" I turned to study his profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair. We were older now, scarred by our choices, but still standing, still choosing each other day by day. "This," I said, gesturing to the space between us, "the conversation. The champagne that isn't a promise but a celebration. The way you're looking at me like you see me." Oliver set down his glass and pulled me close, his arms encircling my waist the way Rowan's had that night. But this touch was different, earned rather than stolen, built on truth instead of longing. "I see you," he whispered against my hair. "I see us." Below, the city pulsed with life, full of people making choices that would change everything. Up here, 29 floors above the world, we held each other and chose to begin again. The champagne tasted like forgiveness. Balcony at night, 29 floors above. The view from here, city lights and champagne. Between the lines. Fiona's marriage to Oliver has become a careful routine of late nights and broken promises. When his friend Rowan appears on their balcony one evening, offering her a little freedom, she makes a choice that changes everything. The intimate encounter forces all three to confront the truth about love, loneliness, and the prices we pay for both connection and neglect. Ultimately, this is a story about second chances and the daily choice to love someone not just in spite of their flaws, but because of their willingness to grow beyond them. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Marcus tend to the small herb garden they'd started together 3 months after that terrible night. His movements were careful, deliberate, the same way he approached everything now. The basil plants were thriving under his attention, their leaves dark green and fragrant in the morning sun. She still remembered the weight of Rowan's presence on their balcony, the way the evening air had felt charged with possibility and danger. The choice she'd made that night, to reach for connection, however fleeting, had shattered something between her and Marcus. But like a bone that heals stronger at the break, they'd found themselves rebuilding on more honest ground. "The oregano's ready," Marcus called through the open window, holding up a sprig. "Want me to add it to the pasta sauce?" "Perfect," she replied, and meant it. These small domestic exchanges had become precious to her, evidence of their daily choice to show up for each other. The aftermath hadn't been easy. Marcus had moved to the guest room for 6 weeks, and they'd sat through countless sessions with Dr. Chen, their couple's therapist. Sarah had expected accusations, demands for details, the kind of explosive confrontation that would give her something to fight against. Instead, Marcus had asked quiet questions that cut deeper than any shouting match. What weren't you getting from me? And how long have you felt this alone? Those questions had forced her to examine the slow erosion of their intimacy. Not just physical, but the 1,000 small ways they'd stopped really seeing each other. Marcus working late to avoid coming home to her restless energy. Sarah filling her evenings with wine and mindless scrolling rather than asking him about his day. The way they'd moved around each other like polite strangers sharing space. Rowan had disappeared from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving only a brief text. I'm sorry. You two deserve better than what I offered. Sarah had deleted his number, blocked him on social media, but she couldn't erase the memory of feeling desired, of being chosen, even if only for a few stolen hours. The hardest part had been admitting to Marcus that her betrayal wasn't really about Rowan at all. It was about the growing canyon between them that neither had acknowledged, let alone tried to bridge. Rowan had simply been there when she'd finally worked up the courage to leap. I stopped seeing you, Marcus had said during one of their therapy sessions, his voice thick with regret. Not just that night, but for months before. I turned you into a problem to manage instead of a person to love. Dr. Chen had guided them through the painstaking work of rebuilding trust, not just Marcus learning to trust Sarah again, but both of them learning to trust their own ability to choose each other daily. They'd established new rituals, morning coffee together before work, phones away during dinner, a weekly check-in where they could voice concerns before they festered into resentment. Sarah had started painting again, something she'd abandoned years ago. Marcus had joined a hiking group, rediscovering his love for the outdoors. They were becoming fuller versions of themselves, which paradoxically made them better partners. The real test had come 2 months ago when Sarah ran into Rowan at the grocery store. He'd looked older, tired around the eyes, and when he'd started to approach her, she'd felt nothing but a mild sadness for all of them, for the loneliness that had driven her to him, for whatever emptiness had made him available to her, for the pain they'd all caused and endured. I'm happy for you, he'd said simply, nodding toward her wedding ring, which she'd taken to wearing again. You look settled. She'd realized he was right, not settled in the sense of giving up, but grounded in a way she hadn't been in years. The restless energy that had driven her to seek validation elsewhere had transformed into something steadier, more sustainable. Now, watching Marcus deadhead the marigolds with the same focused care he brought to everything he loved, Sarah felt the quiet satisfaction of choosing him again today. Tomorrow would require the same choice, and the day after that. Love, she'd learned, wasn't a feeling you fell into and trusted to sustain itself. It was a practice, like tending a garden, requiring attention, patience, and the faith that with consistent care, beautiful things could grow. Marcus looked up and caught her watching him. He smiled, and she smiled back, and in that simple exchange was all the intimacy she'd been searching for. The recognition, the choice, the daily miracle of being truly seen.